sometimes when the subject of student debt cancellation comes up, people bring up the military. The idea is they will say to you that if you really don't want to find yourself mired in student debt, $200,000 or $300,000, or if you're quote unquote lucky, maybe only $39,000, whatever it is, if you don't want to get stuck with an astronomical amount of student debt, people will say, well, then go into the military. The military will help you with your higher education. Why don't you just take that route? Now, my own father served in the military in World War II. He got out early enough that he was teaching GI Bill veterans as a young teacher in a community college. So why isn't that the right way to go? My next guest has some thoughts about that. In fact, he wrote a syndicated op-ed. Will Fischer is, and now some of you write me and say spell everybody's name. Will's last name is spelled F-I-S-C-H-E-R. Will Fischer is the principal at Portside Strategies. He was formerly with Vote Vets. He is a military veteran himself, a veteran like my father of the Marines. And he wrote a recent op-ed, as I mentioned, that was given the headline, "A Veteran Explains Why We Need a New Version of the GI Bill for Everyone." And he joins us now. So first of all, Will Fischer, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me, Brother Eskow.
Secondly, did I get anything wrong in that introduction?
No, you did not, except I do think that with the headline, I took a bit of issue with, because as at my submission, it was "A Veteran Explains Why We Should Cancel All Student Debt and Make Higher Education Tuition Free for All." I think that the headline, though, conveyed what I was trying to do, because I was talk about the ethos that was behind the original GI Bill, the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, and what we as a nation decided to do at that time, and that was to make education available to the masses, starting with those returning from the Second World War.
So we did that, and we, in doing that, first of all, it was to the extent that it was limited, of course, to veterans, to military veterans, but within that group of military veterans, it was universal, meaning you didn't have to prove that you didn't have the money, you didn't have to be below or above a certain income level, right? You didn't have to, it didn't work like if you made more than $5,000 a year, you kick in 100. It was just, if you served, the idea, which was a big chunk of a whole generation of men, right? If you served, then you're in. That was the idea, right?
The idea. Now, it wasn't necessarily executed as well. I know that we definitely have some sisters and brothers of color who weren't able to receive the GI Bill in the same way that their white counterparts were. Women, I already mentioned sisters, but some of the women who served in the Second World War weren't afforded as many of those opportunities. But yes, the idea behind it, it was not means tested. It said that after your service, we want to make higher education available to you at little or no cost to you at all.
And then, because this is an area of interest to me too, then what we experienced was we sent millions of people through college, and it didn't have to be, a 4-year degree. Mm-hmm. A friend of mine always brings up that, with a group called Freedom to Prosper, always brings up that Johnny Cash went to broadcasting school on the GI Bill. That's what, so, you could do different things, trade school or what have you.
Certainly, that was the example with my family. So in addition to, I was able to use a version of the GI Bill in the wake of my service. Both of my grandfathers who had served in World War II were able to use this original GI Bill, one to go to a trade school, learn a skilled trade, and then eventually that led to a job with Ford Motor Company, and thanks to the UAW, a career with good wages, benefits, and the ability to retire with dignity. My other grandfather actually used his GI Bill to go to funeral directing and like mortuary school, and that led him to being a small business owner, which he did for the rest of his life. And I think that is a real piece of this, that beyond sort of the grand idea of having a massive number of people, a mass of your population receiving higher education in different forms, but there's also a tremendous economic argument behind this. In fact,
go ahead. I was just sort of going to get to that.
Yeah, the United States government, and this is based on a congressional study and a pretty well-known statistic at this point, brought in $7 for every $1 they are invested into the original GI Bill.
See, and I was just going to say that again. We're talking with Will Fischer of Portside Strategies about student debt cancellation. I was just going to point that out. That we the government, we the American people, sent millions of people to college or other forms of education on the GI Bill, and enjoyed the greatest burst in prosperity this country has ever seen. Now, again, as you pointed out with the GI Bill, maybe there were, of course, people excluded from this. And next time around, we would want to make sure that doesn't happen. But that gets us to student debt cancellation.
Certainly.
Right? Now, it seems to me, and I'm now speaking to you, Will Fischer, as a veteran, as well as a policy person, and longtime, also veteran of Washington, D.C. and Capitol Hill. But to you as a military veteran, I feel as if this whole argument, well, let's just, which says in effect, let's restrict it to military, people who served in the military, any kind of assistance for student expenses. I feel that that's divisive. I mean, there are a lot of things we could say about that, but among other things, I feel like it's trying to divide us. It's trying to say, if you're, a poor working class kid with no other prospects for getting a higher education or a trade education, because your family is a perfect example of, you can use it in a number of different ways that boost the economy, right? That we want to leave you out unless you do as we say. And I feel somehow as if that's not, forgive me for saying this, but I feel like that's just not the American way to say to somebody, or what we're told is the American way, say you're in, you're out, you're in, you're out.
Well, I think that it can't be overstated enough that the idea that you have to tell people this false and frankly immoral choice that says, you want to receive a higher education? Well, in order to do so, you need to participate in these never-ending U.S. wars. You want an opportunity for a bit brighter of a future? You want to avoid throwing on the yoke of student debt? Well, throw on a flak jacket, and that won't happen. I think that is a false choice. I think that is an immoral choice. And I think that it falls right into a reactionary playbook that has existed for generations now, and that is the using of veterans to attack any type of agenda that is pro-working class. You see it every single day on Capitol Hill. You see people want to go out and say, oh, support the troops and wave the flag, try to bring a veteran on stage, and then use that as a way to then put forth reactionary policies that are anti-working class, and anything that is anti-working class is categorically anti-veteran as well, because the veteran and military family community overwhelmingly come from the working class. You mentioned my own service. Well, I have news for you. I didn't serve with any millionaires or billionaires.
Right. No, good point. And of course now, I come from the Vietnam generation, tail end of the Vietnam generation, but still the Vietnam generation. When I became of age to serve in the military, Vietnam was still going on. And in fact, I was part of the lottery generation.
Okay.
And for people who lived before that or after that, let me tell you, it was a mind F to watch on live television as they drew numbers out of a big rotating wheel. And if your birthday came up early, you were going to serve and maybe die. And if it came up late, you were going to live. Now, how's that for like a science fiction scenario, right? But I lived through it at age 17, and my birthday came up 320 out of 365. That's maybe why I'm here. Okay. But the one thing that the draft did was it was universal, right? I mean, there was no getting around it. In fact, they ended student deferment. So if you were going to go, you could be Michael Bloomberg, you could be RJ Eskow, you could be anybody, you could be Donald Trump, but you didn't get out of the draft process that way. Of course, a lot of people used other routes, but so now we have this kind of situation where, number one, we're using working class, our working class brothers and sisters We're basically saying to them, fight and risk your lives, do as we tell you, uh, join this military machine and serve its interests, or you don't get, these opportunities to advance yourself, right? I mean, we're basically saying if you're not already wealthy enough, let's say for college, that you have to put your life in danger whether you want to or not. And there are two sides to that to me. One, morally, that seems like that's not a very ethical choice to give somebody. And I also think maybe it allows these immoral wars you're talking about, these forever wars. You didn't say immoral, you said forever, to go on. Because if there was nobody stepping up to do them, we'd have to reconsider them. But I'd like your thoughts on all
No,
of that.
look,
I
people.
threw a lot at you.
No. Look, people serve for a variety of reasons. I
course.
don't think it is an accident, though, that the Army last fall reported that the student debt crisis was absolutely helping to maintain recruitment goals. This is a reality. People take a look at these stories. They read about the 44 million people who are really like saddled with this crushing student debt. They say, how can I avoid that? And there is this thing out there that says, look, if you want to avoid that, you can enlist and you can serve in the military.
Right.
And again, that's not why everybody elects to serve, but I don't think it,
Of
I think
course,
it's
yeah.
ridiculous to suggest that it doesn't exist. And I think that, the original GI Bill in many ways could really be viewed as the sort of the foothold, because if you look at the Roosevelt's second Bill of Rights, it included universal education. And I think the GI Bill really was sort of the entryway into eventually getting this to everybody. And all I see in advocating now for canceling all student debt and making public colleges and tuitions and vocational schools tuition free carries on that very same tradition and accomplishes that very same goal. This is a way to have a more educated population. A more educated population is going to be have us have a more vibrant society. And then at the end of the day, it's also a wonderful economic decision, because if you have somebody who is paying $300, $400, $500 a month for the foreseeable future to pay off this massive student debt, that individual very well may not be buying a home. That individual may be buying fewer cars. That individual may elect to not have children because now they can't afford to have childcare and things of this nature. By doing this program and the legislation that has been put forward in the House and Senate to cancel all student debt and to make public colleges and universities and vocational schools tuition free is carrying on a long tradition of putting Americans in a position to pursue happiness.
And as you well know, Will Fisher, the statistics, the research completely backs you up.
Oh yeah, the Levy paper.
The Levy, I was going to
yeah.
mention Levy Institute paper that shows that canceling all student debt would cause economic growth, create millions of jobs. And then in terms of what's happening now, the data also backs you up. Less household formation among younger people who are more disproportionately saddled with student debt. But let's not forget there are people on Social Security, retired people who are still paying off student debt. So we have this situation. Before I let you go, you mentioned the bills in the House and Senate, right? And the House version of the bill is, the lead is on that is Representative Ilhan Omar.
Yes.
And Ilhan Omar, I recall, I think what happened was you tweeted on this issue, or she tweeted on this issue using your article or your quote. And I think that what happened next was you got a little exposure to what she deals with every day.
Right? I have to tell you, I'm so happy that you brought this up. Yes, so Congresswoman Omar tweeted out a link to my op-ed. I think she may have tagged me, and a quote that I said, but like, let's imagine if we took the ethos behind the original GI Bill and applied that to everyone. Something very sort of point of fact of this is what this op-ed was about. And I was immediately, because I was tagged in a tweet by Ilhan Omar, exposed to some of the most vile, racist, sexist, xenophobic, Islamophobic garbage that I have ever seen in my entire life. And what I realized was that this happens to Congresswoman Omar every time she tweets. She could go on Twitter right now and tweet, "It's 52 and sunny." And she would immediately be ratioed and bombarded with these people who I guess just sit around all day and wait for her to tweet so they can throw the most reactionary, racist nastiness you have ever seen at her. And I just wanted to make a point of mentioning that today, and I'm so happy you brought that up, because we do hear this conversation about sort of the online world and how people are, and I have to say, I don't think there is anyone in this country who I have seen, certainly in the political and media landscape, who is on the receiving end of more vile communication than Congresswoman Omar. And I have to say, I can't imagine how a person could handle it with more grace and dignity than she does.
Including death threats that
Yeah.
she gets on a constant basis.
Yeah.
So I guess the moral there is, first of all, you served in Iraq.
Yeah.
That's no walk in the park, as they say, and we thank you for it. Even though I know a lot of my veteran friends say, "Don't thank me for my service." Make sure other people don't have to go through what I went through. But that's another way to. I'll tell you what, she's serving too, right? With a lot of courage. Physical courage, emotional courage, to be able to stand up to the death threats, to be able to stand up to the insults, hold your head up and just go out there every day. I mean, to me, that's an inspiration and an
I'm
example.
so happy, if I may make one last point, I'm so happy you
course.
mentioned the word service, because right now we have, through great sort of efforts by the military-industrial complex, whether that's B-52s flying over NFL stadiums before football games or other means of communication, we have somehow allowed it to get into the mindset of the United States that the only way a person serves is through the military. And the reality is their service takes many different forms. And there are people serving today, keeping people alive, who are sanitation workers who keep plagues from breaking out. There are people who serve as federal meat inspectors.
Absolutely.
Who make sure that we don't all, develop salmonella and drop dead. And
how about Social Security Administration workers who are getting old people and disabled people the finances and resources they need to stay alive?
And in that case, it's not even right there. We can also take it a next step and also remind people that if it's not for Social Security, there are over 4,000 children whose parents, a parent who was killed in Iraq or Afghanistan or some other place, who now they receive their survivor's benefits through Social Security. And the people who make that happen every day, they are absolutely serving this country and serving their fellow Americans. And I think that they should be applauded as such. And there are so many different ways that people serve. And I think it's very important whenever any of us, especially of those of us who served in the military, have to do what we can to remind people of that. And there is no, there are way many more forms of service in this country than just those who put on the uniform and serve in the U.S.
Absolutely.
military.
Coal miners have a fatality rate 9 times that of police officers. I mean, we could go on all day, but the point is very, very well taken. And again, if people want to read more, first of all, if they want to find you, Will Fischer at Portside Strategies. If they want to find your op-ed, it's headlined under a veteran. As we talked, a veteran explains why we need a new version of the GI Bill. So Google that. And Will Fischer, thanks for writing this. Thank you for your service in writing this op-ed, right? And thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you so much for having me, Richard. I really appreciate it.
It was a pleasure.